Most people avoid rejection like fire. But what if it's the exact fire that forges winners? The top 1% don't think of failure as embarrassment. They see it as feedback. When most people get rejected, they stop. They overthink. They doubt. But the rare few, they lean in. They open up that rejection email. They replay the failed conversation, not to hate themselves, but to learn. They know every no is a mirror, and every fall is a compass pointing somewhere new. They don't waste time feeling like victims. They turn into students. And when they rise again, it's not with blind hope, but with better skills. That's why they keep climbing. Not because they avoid failure, but because they face it with different eyes. For most people, rejection is personal. It hurts, it sticks, it repeats. But for the 1%, rejection isn't a sign to quit, it's a sign to shift. They don't ask, "Why me?" They ask, "What now?" When doors close, they don't sit outside crying. They go looking for windows, back doors, and any entry point. They understand that not every no is about them. Sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's misalignment, but never final. That's the quiet advantage of the 1%. They don't get destroyed by a closed door. They use it to build a new one. There's a filter that separates the 1% from everyone else, and it's how they interpret failure. When they mess up, they don't label themselves as not good enough. Instead, they ask what part of the system failed. Was it timing? Skill? Effort? Strategy? They dissect failure like a scientist, not a victim. It's not emotional, it's informational. That's why they grow faster. They extract insights instead of insults. The rest, they internalize and stay stuck. One mindset spirals. The other improves. One gets bitter. The other gets better. Fear of public failure kills more dreams than actual failure. But the 1%, they've made peace with it. They know that every great leap looks stupid at first. They've been laughed at, mocked, ignored. But instead of shrinking, they built immunity. Because they realized one thing: people forget your failures faster than you think. Everyone's busy worrying about their own life. So while others stay small to avoid embarrassment, the 1% take the hit, adjust, and move forward. And that's how they get ahead, while no one's watching. Imagine if every rejection was just a rep, like in the gym. That's how the 1% see it. Not personal, just part of the training. They know that to master anything, sales, love, business, leadership, you need rejection reps. Most people avoid those reps like the plague. The 1% seek them out, because the faster they fail, the quicker they adapt. They don't wait for confidence to show up. They build it through rejection. That's how they get strong, not by avoiding the burn, but by using it to grow. The 1% don't even think in terms of quitting. To them, rejection and failure are normal as brushing teeth. What seems like defeat to most people is just data to them. They'll tweak, pivot, redesign, restart, but they won't quit. Quitting feels illogical when you know failure is a step, not a stop. This mindset creates stamina, the kind that outlasts talent, luck, and even early success. Because when everyone else burns out or gives up, they're still going. Rejection lasts a moment, but regret? That lasts for years. The 1% know this. That's why they'd rather fail at trying than succeed at doing nothing. They understand that safety has a cost, and that cost is growth. Most people play not to lose. The 1% play to learn, to evolve, to win someday. Even if that means falling flat 100 times. Because the real pain isn't being rejected, it's never knowing what could have been. The top 1% often say this. Failure gave them something success never could: clarity. In failure, you learn who's real, what matters, and how strong you are. Success can hide flaws. Failure exposes them. And when you're willing to face that exposure, you're forced to evolve. That's why the 1% aren't afraid of falling. They're afraid of staying blind. Failure is their flashlight. When things fall apart, most people crumble with them. But the 1%, they lean into the pain, not because they like suffering, but because they know that buried inside it is something powerful: resilience. Pain teaches what comfort never can. Rejection tests your belief in yourself. And every time they survive that test, they grow stronger. Eventually, what once crushed them becomes the reason they can't be broken. This is the biggest mindset shift. The 1% don't take rejection personally. They separate the result from their identity. A failed pitch isn't, "I'm not good enough." It's, "That pitch didn't land." That tiny shift changes everything. Because now they can adjust, retry, improve without shame. Most people connect every failure to their self-worth. The 1% connect it to their learning curve. That's why they keep going, while others spiral. It's not ego. It's perspective. The 1% don't wander blindly. Every rejection they face becomes a signal to realign, rethink, and refine. When they get a no, they don't panic. They pause. They ask deeper questions. Was this even the right path? The right audience? The right version of me? In this reflection, they find something most people miss: direction. While others see rejection as a wall, the 1% see it as a signpost. It tells them where not to go, and often that's exactly what leads them to where they should. Most people drag their feet out of fear of messing up, but the 1%, they sprint toward failure. Why? Because they understand that every failure teaches you faster than any course or book ever will. They want the feedback. They want the crash. Because once it's done, they're smarter, sharper, and better equipped. The longer you delay failure, the longer you delay growth. The 1% don't just accept this truth, they embrace it. Fear whispers in everyone's ear. What if they laugh? What if you fail? But the 1% have trained themselves not to listen. They know that fear is a terrible decision maker. It wants comfort, not growth. It wants survival, not greatness. So, when it comes to choices, they let purpose lead, not fear. That's why they look brave. Not because they don't feel scared, but because they act anyway. Failure doesn't stop them. It sharpens their curiosity. Instead of, "Why does this always happen to me?" they ask, "What exactly didn't work, and how can I fix it?" One question leads to self-pity. The other leads to self-mastery. The 1% have trained their minds to be solution seekers. Their inner dialogue sounds like a coach, not a critic. That's why they move forward, even through the mess. The 1% have learned a powerful mental habit. They don't define themselves by results. They can fail at something and still believe they're worthy, still believe they're growing. This identity detachment gives them emotional freedom. While others take a failed attempt as, "I am a failure," the 1% see it as, "I tried something and it didn't work yet." It's not delusion. It's the discipline of the mind. Rejection doesn't make the 1% colder. It makes them stronger, but not in a numb, emotionless way. They still feel, they still care, but they've learned to protect their purpose, not just their pride. They don't shut people out. They just don't let opinions define them. That's the difference. They stay open but grounded, sensitive but focused, vulnerable, yet unstoppable. Sometimes you're not failing because you're not good. You're failing because it's not your time. The 1% get this. That's why they don't rush success or panic when it doesn't come fast. They know growth is seasonal. That winter has its purpose. That rejection now might just be preparation for something better. So they keep building, quietly, faithfully, and when their time comes, they're ready. Yes, feels good, but no teaches more. The 1% know this. Every time they hear no, they lean into the reason. What was missing? What needs improving? Where's the gap? They mine every rejection for gold. Because each no isn't just a denial, it's a map. a map showing where they must grow next. And that's how the 1% evolve faster, because they turn every loss into a lesson. When failure hits, most people get trapped in the now. This is who I am. This is my worth. But the 1% zoom out. They see the bigger picture. Today's failure doesn't define tomorrow's identity. One moment isn't their whole story. This perspective gives them hope, even in defeat. They know they're not done. They're just in a rough chapter. And the ending? That's still being written. This might be the biggest secret. The 1% simply don't stop showing up. They're not always the smartest or most talented, but they're the most consistent. They fail, they rest, they return. Over and over. Their power lies in repetition, in becoming unshakable. Not because they never fall, but because they always rise. And slowly, silently, they separate from the rest. Not overnight, but definitely eventually. Most people think confidence is something you wait for. But the 1% know it's built in motion. You start when you're uncertain. You speak when your voice shakes. You try when your hands tremble. Every act of courage lays one more brick. Over time, those bricks become your confidence. It's not magic, it's muscle. The 1% show up scared, but they keep showing up, and that's what makes them unshakable. Pain breaks most people, but not the 1%. They've trained their minds to convert it into power. They ask, what can I create from this? What can I learn from this? Where can this take me? Instead of running from pain, they run with it. They let it shape their character, not destroy it. While others numb the pain, the 1% let it sharpen them into something unstoppable. Struggle is a natural part of growth, but most people hide it. They want to look perfect. The 1%, they allow themselves to be seen in the process. Messy, real, raw. They know looking weak now doesn't make them weak forever. They know authenticity connects, while perfection isolates. That's why their journey feels different, because it's not filtered, it's felt. Motivation is a mood, it comes and goes. The 1% don't rely on it. They rely on systems, routines, discipline. They work even when it's boring, even when it's raining, even when it hurts. Their secret? They committed their default, not motivation. That's why they succeed, because they work like it's non-negotiable, even on days they don't feel like it. Mindset is not magic. It's repetition, like lifting weights. The 1% know this. They practice positive self-talk. They journal. They read. They train their focus. Just like an athlete hits the gym, they hit their mental reps. That's why they bounce back faster. Not because they're born stronger, but because they train for the fall. Every day. Most people quit when things get repetitive. The 1% lean in, because they know repetition isn't punishment, it's progress. Every rep, every draft, every redo sharpens their edge. They fall in love with the basics, the small steps, because they understand that's where greatness hides. In the unsexy, the quiet, the disciplined. The 1% feel tired. They feel scared. They feel doubt. But here's the difference. They don't let those feelings dictate their actions. Commitment wins. Always. They don't ask, do I feel like it? They ask, did I promise myself this? And if the answer is yes, they do it. That's how they keep rising. Not by feeling perfect, but by showing up anyway. Most people wait to celebrate until they hit the goal. But the 1% find joy in each small win. Each rep, each page, each morning. They wake up and try again. That's how they stay energized. Because if you only celebrate the big things, you'll burn out. But if you celebrate progress, you'll keep going long enough to win. Approval is a trap. The moment you chase it, you lose your power. The 1% have learned this the hard way. That's why they build their identity around purpose, not praise. They stay aligned with their why, even if no one claps, even if no one understands. because they're not doing it for applause. They're doing it for impact, for legacy. The 1% think in decades, not days. While others look for shortcuts, they build foundations. They know true greatness takes time, and they're okay with that, because they're not in a race, they're on a mission. They'll trade quick applause for quiet progress, fast likes for deep legacy. That's why they last. That's why they win. To most, rejection feels like a dead end, but the 1% see it differently. They treat rejection like a sign, not of failure, but of redirection, a course correction from life, a moment to pause, reflect, and pivot. Instead of sulking, they ask, "What's this trying to teach me?" That mindset turns closed doors into corridors, and over time, rejection stops feeling like a stop sign and starts feeling like a reroute to something better. Comfort zones feel safe, but they're silent prisons. The 1% know that everything they want sits on the other side of discomfort, so they don't just tolerate it, they seek it. They walk into the hard conversations. They volunteer for the scary projects. They sit in the awkward silence, because they've learned something powerful. Comfort doesn't build character. Discomfort does. Everyone romanticizes success, but the 1% know the truth. It's repetitive, unglamorous, and often lonely. It's saying no to distractions. It's doing the same thing day after day, with precision and patience. While others chase highs, they chase consistency. They fall in love with the process, not the praise. That's why their success seems magical, because they made the boring look beautiful. Life will bend you. That's not a maybe, it's a promise. The difference is, most people break, but the 1%, they bend. They absorb the hit, pause, and rebound. They treat setbacks like slingshots. The further they're pulled back, the further they launch forward. It's not that they're invincible, it's that they're flexible. That's what resilience looks like. Some days, nothing seems to move. No recognition, no validation, no obvious results. But the 1% still show up. Why? Because they trust the invisible work. They believe every effort, no matter how unseen, is building pressure under the surface, like water behind a dam. One day, it'll break through, but only if they don't stop, and they never do. Trophies are shiny, but fragile. The 1% don't rely on them. They build self-worth from the inside out, from effort, from courage, from integrity. Their self-worth isn't based on wins, but on who they became chasing those wins. So even if they lose the game, they still walk away proud, because they know who they are. Most people wait for a sign, for approval, for someone to tell them, "You're ready." The 1% don't wait. They decide. They act. They stumble and figure it out on the way, because they've learned something critical. Waiting rarely brings clarity. Action does. And once you move, life starts moving with you. Trying to be liked by everyone is the fastest way to lose yourself. The 1% learn that early. That's why they walk their truth, even if it makes others uncomfortable. They're not rude, but they're real, and they've made peace with not fitting every room. They're okay being misunderstood, because they know the right people will understand them deeply. Every day is a chance to grow or stay still. The 1% choose growth. That means reading when they could scroll, asking for feedback when it hurts, admitting when they're wrong. They chase the version of themselves that's just a little better than yesterday. Not because they hate who they are, but because they respect who they could become. In a world obsessed with fast, the 1% value forward. They don't rush. They move with clarity. While others sprint blindly, they walk with vision. Because they know speed without direction leads to burnout. But slow, deliberate progress, that's how legacies are built. They'd rather go deep than fast. And that's why their impact lasts longer. Most people freeze at the thought of failing. But the 1%, they fear something worse. Regret. The haunting what if, that lingers when you never try. So they go all in. Not recklessly, but bravely. Because they'd rather fail honestly than succeed passively. They don't want a safe life. They want a full one. And they know failure is part of that fullness. Overthinking is like quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. But the 1% breaks the loop. They don't obsess over every detail, every outcome, every what if. They make a decision and commit, even if it's imperfect, because action brings clarity, not the other way around. They think just enough to move, and then they move. Pain breaks some, but it builds others. The 1% use it as fuel. They don't deny the hurt. They transform it into books, into businesses, for the purpose. Pain, to them, isn't a curse. It's raw material. For something greater, they take what was meant to destroy them and create something unforgettable with it. Scrolling social media, watching others rise, it's easy to feel behind. But the 1% don't compare. They compete with yesterday's version of themselves. Because comparison steals joy, but personal growth builds it. They track progress in silence, and they clap for others without shrinking themselves. That's how they stay grounded and powerful. Most chase results first, but the 1%, they start with identity. Who do I want to be? That guides what they do, and that leads to what they have. They act like the person they want to become, long before results show up. It's identity first, success second. That's how they stay consistent when no one's watching. Jealousy feels ugly, but the 1% don't ignore it. They decode it. To them, jealousy is a map. It shows them what they secretly want. Instead of envy, they choose curiosity. Why does this trigger me? That question brings clarity, and clarity brings action. They don't sit in jealousy. They let it point them toward what to build next. The world wants your attention, your time, your energy. But the 1% protect theirs. Ruthlessly. They say no, often not because they're rude, but because they're clear. Every no to distraction is a yes to purpose. They've learned that boundaries don't push people away. They protect the version of you worth becoming. Motivation is a mood, and moods are unreliable. The 1% don't wait for it. They build habits that move with or without motivation. They show up on bad days, on lazy days, on rainy days, because greatness isn't about how you feel. It's about what you do, especially when you don't feel like doing it. Your outer world reflects your inner voice. The 1% understand this. They don't let that voice be cruel, sarcastic, or doubting. They train it. Speak to themselves like someone they love, like a mentor, not a critic. Over time, that voice becomes their greatest ally. And once the mind is on your side, everything changes. Here's what sets the 1% apart. They don't just think differently about failures and rejections. They live differently. They don't fear the fall. They trust their ability to rise. They don't chase validation. They build value. And they don't wait for change. They become it. If this hit home for you, don't just scroll. Subscribe to Billion X, where deep minds grow stronger every day.